I'm going to talk about the survey results, these ones, of the Meeting C++ community survey, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction what the survey is based on and what other surveys we have. But a lot of the survey questions I'm going to cover are not covered in other surveys, and often when I cover a survey question from another survey, it's more like a similar survey question. My goals with this talk are like every year to give you an overview of the user statistics and other statistics from my survey. And this is based on the total survey results and also comparing the result from 2020 to 2023, because right now I'm not able to pull a current aggregate of the running year. And so the newest aggregate I have is from 2023. And then at the beginning of next year, I'll have the aggregate for 2024. In the future, this is actually some like plans I have. Maybe quickly talk about that. It's like we're getting now in the range where some of the software that was written to display the results of the survey still makes sense to display it as an overall result, but I need a different format when I want to display the results going from 2020 to 2024, 2025, right? And now I have enough data to actually do that and have those graphs be something meaningful. And so that's probably something which I am going to do next year. One problem with that is that the work on the survey is always on top of everything else when I have time, and it's financially not like something which pays off like working for the conference or arranging the job fair, etc. All the other things which I do are often very, very focused nowadays on semi-commercial work, which has people then giving the opportunity to pay me. And I don't want to start charging for the survey results. I could, of course, do that and then that be the product, but I don't think it's worth it. So let's see what we can learn from the community for the results of the total survey and comparing 2022 to 2023, which actually shows some interesting results already. And this is the URL, survey.meetingcpp.com, where you can find the survey. It's over 80 questions, and I assume I'll take 15 minutes for the talk. Maybe it's more. I have added a few more slides and compared a few more things, so I'll be talking a bit more, so we'll see. I've already mentioned there's other surveys, so let's quickly have a look. There are annual C++ surveys by isocpp.org and by JetBrains. And most of these have a certain set of questions, which is a lot shorter than what I ask and what I do, and often are more general questions about IDEs, C++ standards, what people do, other languages, etc. And some of those questions I'm going to cover in here, but mostly I'm going to focus on the survey for Meeting C++, which goes into more details, which I think is more interesting to the C++ community. But the annual surveys cannot go into that detail because people will not answer so many questions often. There's also very few people that answer like all the questions in my survey, which is, kind of how I started the survey years ago, as doing polls on social media. And then I asked the C++ user group question, and this was actually in front of CPPCon to do some research, like who's attending C++ user groups and who's coming to C++ conferences. And then I figured out, because this is still working when you combine things, you can like combine the question and get a even deeper insight of this question. But all during this time, I was thinking we need a better survey tool. We need to have better data on the C++ community, and all our talks are usually based on either new features, but we rarely have like numbers backing those talks, and it's always something a little bit fluffy, and we should have actually more data on it. And this is one of the goals I have with the survey. So during December 2019, I wrote most of the survey tooling and launched the survey then in 2020, in the beginning of 2020. It is a continuous survey. It's not a yearly survey. I take yearly aggregates, so every vote from 1 year gets into this aggregate. The questions are single and multiple choice, as you see here. Technical details, the tool is session-based. If you're logged in, it's saved into two different aggregates, one on general aggregate and a logged-in aggregate, which slowly reaches into an area where I think this is worth also like adding to the software that I can display it. Features is I can combine questions, but in the aftermath with 80 questions, that has become difficult to find a good combination that is useful. So I think I don't have it in this talk. I've showed that with other things. I've used this to show more details on specific communities. Like I did talks on Boost and showed when we combine questions, we can see what Boost folks do or Qt folks do in comparison to the overall community, and that then gets interesting. And the votes are saved as an aggregate and also save the vote as a session, right? And so I have both data sets, and that's how I'm able to combine a question. Then I'm looking only for sessions that answered both questions, and then I can filter the answers of the one question in the overall results of the other questions. More technical details, I log answers for 30 days, and if you skip, it's logged for 60 days. Re-answering a question does not add the aggregate to, so does not change the aggregate, okay? And finding questions is still hard. That's why I have still less than 100 questions, I think. And it's kind of an art form. There's a lot of questions I've been asked to add, or I thought about it to add myself, but I haven't found a good way to make a set which is like a closed set of answers and a good and short question which does not need an explanation and is not too complicated and is also not too niche, because otherwise, like for example, when I ask specific questions about standard features, I need to wait a few years until the release of that standard is through, because otherwise I have most people saying that they're not using that standard. And we're going to see that actually in the data today. So let's dive into the survey and see what we can find. Just quick overview. This is a survey question, how it looks when you do the survey, and this is the result. And here we simply see that in the UI library frameworks, which frameworks do you use for UI? Qt is in the lead and has always been in the lead. And in the recent years, DRM-GUI is catching up, and it's now more popular than MFC. That's nice to see. And one of the big things I was wondering about is standard adoption. We release every 3 years now a new standard, and it's kind of hard to see that we have nearly no data on when, how people actually start adopting those standards. And the yearly surveys from JetBrains and ISOCPP shine a light on this, but it's always a yearly snapshot, and I think it's not so easy to like make an aggregate over the years over it, and I can do that very easily. And I think I'm now at the point where this next year we have the data set to actually go forward with that plan. And here you see in 2017, we see 12% using C++17. C++14 is 35%, C++11 is the dominant standard with 66%. Makes a lot of sense in the time frame when you remember that being 7 years ago. And In this year, we see that 43% are on C++17. So unlike 7 years, oh no, this is from last year because this year's data, I'm not sure if it's published or not, but anyways. So in 2023, we see 43%, 29% on C++20, 10% on 23, and so on. And as you see, this doesn't add up to 100%, so this is a multiple choice question. ISO-CPP asks a similar but not the same question. I really would like ISO-CPP to actually answer, to add this simple question to this to their set of questions. And here in 2018, we see initially that, yeah, C++17 is used by some, but not by everyone. And then 14, 11, etc. Very similar. And if we compare to this year, we see that in this year, 20 is being picked up. But C++17 is the current standard where a lot of folks are on, and here even the majority is still on C++11 and 14. But this again is a multiple choice question, so it's clear that people who know C++17 are also gonna choose C++11. In my own survey, I have several questions about this, which all have the same result set of answers. And I do not offer C++23 at the moment because it's just became a standard, right? And I think it's interesting to add that next year and then see how the data set then evolves from 2025 into the future. And so this question now is, what standards do you currently use in your projects? And this is a multiple choice question, right? It says standards and you can choose multiple. Here we see that C++20 has, in comparison to the last year's, catched up. C++17 is the dominant used standard, and of course 11 and 14 are still present. That's hardly surprising. I ask in what standards you have experience in, and then the result shifts into people, are mostly now in C++11 till 17. And of course, a lot of folks have experience in 98 and 03, And 20, again, just it's natural to see that 20 will be catching up over the next years. And here we are now able to compare to 23 from 2020. And we see that 17 has risen, and especially 20 has risen by a lot. Okay. So C++17 is now on second place. And C++11 is still in first place by this question. Kind of makes sense. And then I have a single choice question. It's like, which C++ standards, or standard, should it be actually, do you use the most at work currently? And there we see that C++17 in the overall survey, which makes a lot of sense. Comparing from 2020 to 23 in this case is something we actually really should do, because things are changing over time, right? So we see that more folks, a little bit of more folks, and these are percentages, are using now C++17. But we also see that more folks use now C++20 than 11 and 14. So the community is slowly moving forward. And if you are on 17, you should prepare to move towards 20 with the current tooling which has been released in this year. And if we make this a bit bigger, then it's a bit easier to read. So we see in the last year, it's a bit more than 45%, 47% using C++ 17. And we're not yet at 25% of folks using C++ 20. But when you see the increase, we should be there by 2024. Then when I had those questions in the survey, I wondered, it's nice to have data on that, but actually I would like to have more details on a standard. So as I have the ability to just keep adding questions and I'm not limited by the number of answers so much, I decided to add 2 questions for every standard. One for the language features and one for the library features. And let's start with C++ 11. Here we see that the top 3, it's actually basically the shared first place is auto, lambdas, and null pointer. It's not very surprising using kind of in the 4th place, then constant expression. And constant expression has changed a lot since C++ 11. But that's what it is, right? Variadic templates and all the good things. A lot of use in the C++ 11 standard. Interesting is that the new string literals and long int seems not to have found so much use. And also attributes is something which has found way more use in the future. I do actually have an upcoming slide on attributes where I ask about attribute usage, and there we can see that it's increasing from 2020 to 2023. And the library features, we see that the shared pointer and unique pointer, the smart pointers are the most used feature. Then we have other features like thread on the 3rd place, function, tuple, mutex log guard. This also kind of features the distribution of use cases in your code bases, right? And so that's interesting to see. For C++ 14, the language features are more prominent. It was a small standard. Aggregate member initialization, 3rd place, function, return type deduction, 2nd place, and 1st place is generic lambdas. And variable templates were also introduced. But it was a small standard, and it's more like small features where you're not really probably are aware that this is a C++ 14 feature. I'm skipping over the library features because there was very few library features in C++ 14, and the question doesn't make so much sense in today's context anymore. C++ 17 again had some language features, and the most popular is structured bindings and if constant expression, followed by nested namespace definitions and new attributes like fall through, maybe, unused, no discard. And here we see that now attributes are becoming more popular. They're now here in the 4th place. And this is one of the big changes, I think, from 11 to 17, that attributes are now part of the language. C++ 17 library features. We see that optional is the most used, followed by string view, file system, and variant. And again, looking at the not so much used features, mass special functions has a bit of an availability problem, but also is very special. So not everyone will use it. That's natural. algorithms, I think, is also something which should be more used, but also I think had for a long time an availability problem. And then uncaught exceptions is also something which is not used everywhere, and exceptions generally are often turned off in many code bases, right? Now coming to C++20. I had to turn off this question when I put it in first, because mostly people were using this to say, I'm not using that standard. And I was like, that's actually not what I wanted to have as a result of this question. And still we see now that 800 folks are here in this question, being recorded with C++20 out since 2020. Well, not since 2020, I think I added it in 2022. And so we see this basically very, very fresh results here for this question. Concepts is the most popular C++20 feature. Modules is a feature which still is lagging behind the expectation of that feature, I think. And I am looking forward to see if modules actually will catch up in usage with the other features, or if it will stay in the lower places here, and if it really stays in the last place, you know. Even other has more votes than modules. That's kind of interesting. And I've posted that on social media, and the reaction was that some people were like even wondering why so many people are using modules, but modules has been available in Microsoft Visual Studio for a while, and so there is a small user base for that in our language, definitely given. The other popular features are designated initializer, this as lambda capture, and the expanded constant expression, constant eval init things. Coroutines is also something which is like so popular to talk about that I'm kind of looking forward to see how this feature will evolve in this question, right? Concepts is something where everyone has very easily a use case for, especially when you use also constant expression, then you naturally are more into this compile time world, and constant expression naturally then, you know, benefits from concepts. And the library features. Ranges and format are two libraries which have been available prior to the standard in standalone libraries, so that's probably why they have a bit more of adoption. Span is something which is a good addition to the standard and doesn't really have a different preoccupation, so naturally it finds its use case. Constant expression string, constant expression vector, I find interesting, and this kind of shows that actually constant expression is really picking up in usage in our language. And then other popular features after this is source location. The mathematical constants is something I want to mention. That's also a feature which is not known to many, and if it would be known to more folks, it probably would be more popular. And then we have the multi-threading and concurrency features, which are very nice to have. But again, I think these are things which will be not as popular with the community because they're not as much used and they're more specialized features. And once I had all this data on the standard features, I was like, the containers are so long in the standard that it actually would be nice to see what the usage is of that and to see that. And so vector is the most used container, which is not a surprise, followed by map and array. And here array, I think, is nice to see. Array has been around for a while. And is actually a very, very useful container when you do things with constant expression, because it's while string or vector and constant expression cannot be generated for then be used in runtime. You can have an array and save your table you generated maybe with a vector, but then you have to transfer that into an array to use it as a table for your calculations, for example, at runtime. And one thing is like interesting that forward list hasn't caught up so much, but list is never too popular in C++, and it's actually kind of interesting to see that. And then moving forward, questions about standard adoption are always interesting. And SOCPP asks two different questions here. And the first one is, in the next 12 months, does your current project plan to start allowing additional use of newer C++ standard features? And more than 50% say yes, which kind of feels natural. Also, 20% say no. And when you think about that, we have lots of folks in automotive which use coding standards like MISRA or AUTOSAR, which are then pinned to a specific C++ standard. That makes sense. Then they do ask a specific question about C++20 and C++23 feature. And specifically for major releases like 2023, in the next 12 months, does your current project plan to allow use of these features in production code? And the features they name here are concepts, coroutines, and modules. And here we kind of see that, folks plan to move to concepts mainly. And so blue is yes, green is yes, and blue is no. And coroutines and modules seems not to be so much on the plan to move to. And so the adoption curve for concepts is much higher than for those features. I do not ask a question on standard features, but I ask a question on the standard itself. And here we see that the plan to upgrade to C++20 is very popular. And then there's also some people which already have upgraded to C++20, and upgrading to C++17 is also popular in the time frame of the survey. This is the overall survey. And let's compare this with 2020 to 23. And then we see that naturally less folks are planning to upgrade to 11 or 14 and 17. And the amount of folks which have upgraded in this time frame has gone up. It's over 25% now. It's even over 35% who plan to upgrade, or seemingly have upgraded this year, right? And then there's an increase from 10 to 14% that people of folks that do not upgrade in the coming year, which makes sense. And we saw that was 20% in the ISO-CPP survey. There's good reasons not to do so, as I mentioned. There's various standard features. And here is the question on standard attributes, which I think is most interesting when we are looking at the differences between 2020 and 23. So the amount of folks which does not use attributes has decreased from over 40% to under 30%. This is a drastic decrease. The no return attribute has grown from 20% to almost 30%. Carries dependency is an attribute which is still very, very rarely used. And would be a really mean interview question, by the way. Deprecated is used more, but I'm not sure with the history of deprecated if, it's something we can use in C++, but the standard seems not to think that it's a success story so much, I think. Fall through has increased, as has no discard. No discard is the most used attribute by far. And it's interesting to see maybe unused to go into the second place. It was in the 4th place, but it was a type thing in 2020, and last year it's now in usage by over 40%. Unlikely and likely increase a little bit, but also there has been in the meantime a talk showing that the results of compilers with the usage of this is not so much that you should use it. So we'll see how the future decides on this attribute. The no unique address attribute has also increased a little bit in usage, but it's again, it's a very special use case, and not everyone will have the means to put that into use. And then I think there are some new attributes since the introduction of the question, which I haven't added to the question. I think these are in 23, and 23 is just basically a standard which just becomes available to folks to experiment with around. And I think that by next year, it might make sense to look into what should I add from 23 already to the survey, and what are the things which I might not want to add directly, and see when the adoption is ready to actually make useful C++ survey results. And now we get to the non-C++ related questions for a short while. Other programming languages is always a popular question. It's C and Python. And then there's other programming languages like .NET, Java, JavaScript, Bash, Assembly, and so on. If we compare this to the values from 2020 to 2023, I've cut out this where it actually is interesting. The other part of the graph just looks the same. We see actually 2 languages increasing, and that is Rust and TypeScript. And both are now at 12%. Rust makes a bit more of an increase than TypeScript, but we'll see where this stands in the future, right? Another question I have is like, on which continent do you live? Because that's an easy question on your location, which is not too specific. Otherwise, I would have to have too many answers. Like there's, a lot of countries, so I cannot go on the country level. I would have to write extra code for this and then trust people not to just click through and choose the first country. So Europe is mostly the source of my survey. This has to do with me posting the questions in social media, and then it's either location-based algorithms showing this more to Europeans, and Meeting C++, of course, having a big reach, and the conference has a lot of European visitors and less American or Asian visitors, or even like Asia, South America. Asia is through social media reachable, North America also, and the rest of the contributions are just a tiny bit. And if we look at the comparison of 2020 to 23, we see that Asia has risen North America has more or less stayed the same, and in the percentage with more people contributing from Asia and North America staying the same. Europe has gone down a little bit. That's fine. Age distribution, the overall survey in the age distribution has now reached a nice curve. And most of the people answering the survey are between 25 and 48 or 54. I do ask on how many companies did you work for? And so we see here that most folks still, also again, this goes into some sort of curve. And I think the yearly results would show an interesting change here. But this is just, some folks seem to still stick around with the first company they have, and then there's more folks with more experience. Because I do have a question later on how many years do you work with C++. I have a question if you like, are you looking for a job? Are you happy at your job? Kind of, and here it's still the majority, which is not looking for a job, but the folks which are unemployed or students have risen. And also more people are looking now than it was in the past, as you can see here when you compare this. I do also have the question, would you recommend your current workplace to a fellow programmer? And you see the results here are very similar to the previous question. I do ask how many coworkers do you have? And so you see most folks seem to work in small teams of either 1 to 3 or up to 6 people. But let's get back to C++. Tools and frameworks. Which compilers do you use? We see that GCC is the most popular, Clang, Visual Studio, or Visual C++. And when we see the comparison, then interesting, the usage of Visual Studio has decreased from 58 to 48%. So 10% of users are less than that. And I think that's significant. We see a rise in GCC. We see a small rise in Clang, which I think is in the range of just how things work in statistics. We see Intel rising a little bit, but that'd be interesting to see if that's like actually just the graph moving up and down in the statistics. And it will be interesting to see how Visual Studio and Visual C++ in this will go in the future, When we speak about IDEs, Visual Studio is still the most popular one, followed by Visual Studio Code, which has risen into this position. CLine is also popular, and Qt Creator. If we compare the yearly results, we see that Qt Creator is not as popular as it used to be. We see that CLine has risen, and both are now kind of used still by under 20%. The usage in Visual Studio has declined, and this is multiple choice. And Visual Studio Code has, in 2023, become the most popular IDE. And there's, of course, lots of others, VI, Vim, etc., being also popular. And here's the big picture. which frameworks do you use? And here it's just basically Boost and Qt, and everything else is not as much used. Which UI framework? It's mostly Qt. Dear Imgui has come up in the last years, and now it's on par with MFC, which is nice to see. And then everything else, I have CopperSpice in here, which, you know, at the moment seems not to be able to compete with Qt, unfortunately. I do ask, like, on tests, I have some questions, and here, for example, I ask which type of tests do you use? Unit tests, integration tests, and static code analysis seems to be the most used. Fuzzing is increasing, but it's still probably not enough people using it. And talking about unit testing libraries, this is still mostly Google Test and Catch, and the Boost folks using their own test library. And this brings us to the end. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, want to have something added to the survey, feel free to reach out to me in social media or per email. Thanks for listening.